xây tương thân tình trong đạo Phật, tùy khác màu nhưng một tôn sư. Hôm nay đây cùng nhau họp mặt, quyết noi theo đường Phật giáo Hoàng Dương.
Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Kính bạch sư tôn đức, giáo phẩm tăng ni, kính thưa quý khán thính giả của đài truyền hình IBC. Đây là chương trình Sống Đời Sống Phật, và trong chương trình này thì Đại Đức Thích Ấn Tri là Phó Tổng vụ trưởng Tổng vụ Hành Pháp của Tăng đoàn Giáo hội Phật giáo Việt Nam Thống nhất Hải ngoại sẽ chia sẻ với những người trẻ những giáo lý căn bản bằng tiếng Anh. Chúng ta sống ở Mỹ thì chắc chắn rằng là những cái thế hệ thứ hai, thứ ba giỏi tiếng Anh hơn là tiếng Việt. Do vậy mà thỉnh thoảng chúng tôi cũng có một số những cái bài giảng bằng tiếng Anh. Như vậy thì sẽ giúp cho tuổi trẻ có được cái cơ hội hiểu thêm về những gì mà Đức Phật đã dạy. Thì hôm nay chúng tôi chỉ đặt những cái câu hỏi rất là căn bản thôi, và xin mời Đại Đức Ấn Tri gửi lời chào đến quý khán thính giả của đài truyền hình IBC.
Nam mô A Di Đà Phật. Thank you for inviting me, dear Master, to share some of my experiences and thoughts about the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. I feel it's extremely important now, more relevant than ever, for us to not only understand the Buddha's teachings, but to put it into practice. We see during this time that there's a lot of stress, anxiety, fear, depression, a lot of mental instability is happening not only in ourselves, in the family household, in the country, and in the world. And the Buddha and his teachings allows for stability, mental stability, balance, true peace and happiness, despite all the things that are happening in this current world.
Thank you. The first question I want to ask you that, what is Buddhism?
Namo Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Master asked the question, what is Buddhism? And from many different people and from many different ways, the question of what is Buddhism can be answered in many ways. People can recognize Buddhism, first of all, as a religion, philosophy, a way of living, a spiritual path. And the way that I could best answer the question, what is Buddhism, is that it's a way of life for us to practice based on our historical Buddha called Shakyamuni Buddha. So Shakyamuni Buddha, in order to explain what is Buddhism, is to have a little bit of sharing about his life. And so Lord Shakyamuni Buddha, born well over 2,600 years ago, was born as a prince, known as Prince Siddhartha Gautama. And once he was born, it was prophesied would he become either a great king or either a Buddha. So out of great care and protection, his father, the king, protected Prince Siddhartha from the world. But despite his best care and concern, Prince Siddhartha was able to leave his palace. And even though in the palace he had every form of comfort, care, entertainment, and desire fulfilled, once Lord Siddhartha came out of his palace and saw someone old, someone sick, and someone that passed away, he was awakened for a little bit to see that there's pain and misery in this world, and eventually old age, sickness, and death. So I say this because many of the things we feel today in society is angst, anxiety, existential crisis. And this is what Prince Siddhartha saw well over 2,600 years ago. And so out of the welfare and care for all beings, Prince Siddhartha renounced his life in the kingdom and was in search of enlightenment to overcome all pain, stress, and suffering. And after spending many years, 6 difficult years, he was then known as the Buddha, the fully awakened and realized one, from becoming a prince who renounced life into becoming the Buddha, Lord Shakyamuni Buddha. And from his teachings on forward, to understand suffering, to understand emotional pain, mental stress, spiritual crises, known as Lord Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha's teachings is the faith and the wisdom tradition that we follow from well over 2,600 years upon his arrival into Parinirvana. So I know this is not a most direct response to what is Buddhism, but once we understand that Buddhism simply is a path for us to recognize and understand the pain, stress, suffering in ourselves, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, it is us to follow this path to overcome suffering, stress, pain, whether it's emotional and physical. So it inspires us to practice.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, what is the core of teaching of Buddha?
Yeah. So us as Buddhists follow the core teachings of the Buddha, which the Buddha laid the foundation of what's called the 4 Noble Truths. And so as I was explaining, the very first noble truth is to recognize, not in a pessimistic way, because when we hear about the word suffering, in Pali it is called dukkha. And dukkha can have many different aspects of us feeling pain. It doesn't have to be full-on suffering, but it can be mental anguish. It can be stress, even if it's gradual or little. It can be any form of mental pain, such as anxiety, fear, depression, and sadness. All of these things culminate into the first noble truth. And so I say this because now more than ever, many of the people from the younger generation understand this pain very well. It's a reality that we must face. But the Buddha didn't just say from the first noble truth, he goes on into number 2, number 3, and number 4 to overcome this pain. Number 2 is the cause of why we have stress, pain, misery, and suffering. One of the causes is because of tanha, or thirst. We continually crave and desire things. We're continually wanting and trying to find sources of happiness that the Buddha regarded as wise or unwise. If we chase things that are not lasting, because the Buddha also said that things are impermanent, then we chase things such as material things, fame, wealth, fortune, and praise. And if you look into every aspect of a material thing in yourself, we tend to grasp and chase things that are not lasting. For example, if we chase money and fortune, those things will go away eventually. If we chase money and fortune and continue to strive for it, if we don't have it, we're suffering. But once we have it, we're afraid of it to go away. So eventually, we're with pain. The Buddha therefore expounded that there is a way for us to try to find true happiness, true peace, and meaningful life. And that is to understand how we can have cessation, or the ending of unwholesome, unskillful desire, thirst. And once we're able to eliminate this wanting and craving for unwholesome, unskillful, unwise things, we're able to then move into the 4th noble truth. The second is the cause of suffering. The third is the cessation of suffering.
But let's I want to have another question. The Buddha teaches that life is impermanent and full of suffering. Consider a negative?
If we are constantly, if I'm mentioning that in life it is permanent, impermanent, and it is suffering, once we understand this fact of life, it is not negative, but rather realistic and optimistic. Once we're able to understand that there's inevitable changes in life, we can adapt and change ourselves for the better. We can use law of impermanence. We can see suffering as a reality of life. We see, even though things are challenging and difficult, there are ways for us to cultivate another path, which is the path of virtue, the path of restraint, the path of seeing and following the Buddha's guide of what's called precepts. So even though we see life as ever-changing and not lasting, the Buddha gave a method and a way and practice, and for us to not only have faith in, but to experience as ourselves what's called an ethical or moral lifestyle change. We change our mind to see that there are positives in us to cultivate inside of ourselves instead of grasping and wanting outside the things we have. And there's another way of practice which corresponds into the fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path.
Well, thank you. But where should a beginner in Buddhism start? That is very important, because not only one, but a lot of people want to start to practice the teaching of the Buddha, but they don't know how to. So would you please explain to this?
Thank you. I believe if a beginner were to hear some of my message, it is quite difficult to understand. But for a very beginner, for example, if you're in elementary school, middle school, and just in high school, the very first thing you should have come to is to take refuge. Take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. This means taking refuge in what the Buddha calls the three gems, the triple gems. The Buddha, which, as I said, which is our teacher. The Dharma, which is the teachings, the law, the path for us to understand the Buddha's message, and the Sangha. And the Sangha is what any beginner, any Dharma friend or spiritual friend can come towards. So if you come to any temple or if you have any online source of refuge, then to first understand the Buddha's teachings is to find a community, a place nearby in the city or in the countryside, or if you don't have access to a temple or community, you try your best to find online to have a source of being in touch with the Buddha's teachings. And when you have that, when you take refuge, when you're able to pay homage to the Buddha, pay homage to the Dharma, and pay homage to the Sangha, that is a way for you to first set forth your first step into Buddhism. And so if you don't have the conditions, as I said, to be nearby a temple or a place, you can put forth and make a vow in your mind to pay homage, to pay respect, and to live a life to practice the Buddha and his teachings. And in form of taking a refuge, every single Buddhist layperson and monks and nuns alike, we follow the 5 moral guidelines or precepts. So once you take refuge, which is the first step, you understand what's our moral framework, how we see in Buddhism what is right, what is wrong, what is skillful, what is wise, and what is foolish. And so the 5 precepts, or the 5 moral guidelines, number 1 is to not kill. So number 1 is very important, is once we understand not to kill, not to take a life, we see that in Buddhism, life is very precious. Through the Buddha's great compassion and through ourselves, we try to vow to protect and to help life. We also try our best not to harm, hurt, kill others. And it doesn't have to necessarily be life, but it can also mean in a form of hurting others in the form of their reputation and things like that. 1 is to not kill. 2 is to not take what is not given to you, essentially meaning do not steal. Because once we understand that things and property are precious to others, we do not steal because we see in our mind we tend to want to take things that are not ours from greed. And instead of stealing and taking things, we nourish that with giving and being generous. That is the second way for us to practice to not steal. Instead of stealing, we see what's important for others, which is their own property, things, and we in turn try to nourish that by giving to others, whatever we can. The 3rd precept, the 3rd moral guideline, is to understand about what we would consider love or true love. Because in an adult way, we can consider an act as sexual misconduct. But saying it in a more literal way is to understand, such as which aligns in America and a Western world, that we must understand what consent is, what is love, what is true love, and the love which is not formed from true love or love if you tend to cheat on others and cheat on your partner, it is a way for you to harm relationships, harm the family, and harm the household. So the Buddha made the third precept, which is not have sexual misconduct, to understand the difference between love and true love as very important, because relationships in ourselves and the family is important. The fourth is to not say lies, to not slander, to not talk back, which is our verbal conduct. The things we say with our mouth is very important. So instead of saying lies and slandering and having harsh language, we try our best to speak the truth, what is right, what is timely, what is appropriate, and doing so allows us to live authentically and real with ourselves. The fifth precept is by not consuming intoxicants. Intoxicants are something that are such as drugs, alcohol, substances that causes our mind to become heedless. Once we consume different substances which are harmful to the body, those things will allow our mind not to stay pure. And if our mind is diluted and cloudy from different substances which causes us to be heedless, then we tend to live in an unwholesome, negative way. So this is the basic 5 precepts we follow as Buddhists on the path for us to have happiness, peace, and joy by avoiding doing harm to ourselves and for others.
Thank you very much, Venerable Ấn Tri. So please tell me that what are the benefits of observing the 5 precepts?
There are many benefits that allows us to observe the 5 precepts. One is to understand that if you take into practice and experience, if you practice the precepts, not harm yourself, not to harm others, then immediately you will have a life where you're very well respected, very well loved. You tend to be more confident because you live a life where you're peaceful to yourself and others. And in doing so, in a more advanced way, it's a basic psychological, ethical change. So if you drive your mind to the Buddha and the awakened ones that practice these simple 5 precepts, you will also in return live a life full of happiness and peace, which will you have from the more experience that you have practicing the precepts of especially not killing, not stealing, not harming relationships by respecting others and their bodies. You do not tell lies and you do not consume intoxicants. So those 5 alone, each of them can have their own discussion, can have a life where you will live a life lived to experience happiness and peace.
Yeah, thank you. So please continue talking about 4 Noble Truths. Yeah, 4 Noble Truths.
Sure.
Yeah.
From coming into the very last of the 4 Noble Truths, if we keep on talking about pain, misery, impermanence, and suffering too much, it might draw away people that are eager to listen. But I talk about the positives. To overcome suffering is where the Buddha expounds, or he shares what's called the Eightfold Path. So once we understand that we can overcome the suffering, I hope many listeners will be very enthused and curious to see how is it that we're able to arrive at peace and happiness. So the Eightfold Path goes that first is to have right understanding. Second is to have right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So for the time today, I can just go over a few of them, and the first is to have correct understanding, correct view. And the way, if we're able to understand the Buddha's view correctly, will set forth stage into having thoughts, words, and deeds align. The view that we have in Buddhism is to arrive at cultivating compassion and wisdom. Compassion and wisdom in our life is to understand not only ourselves, to wish ourselves to not have pain, to give ourselves love, and to extend that to all others. And if you have a mindset which is not harm, a mindset which is to help, encourage, and motivate others, that is a way for you to have a taste of what's called enlightenment, the light that shines from our ignorance. Because through wrong understanding, we have wrong understanding from having greed, anger, and ignorance, or we can have jealousy and pride, and most of these things come from ourselves. If we live a selfish life, we're living in a life with incorrect understanding. A selfish life is a person who tends to look down on others, be hateful of others, be jealous of others. They tend to want to take more things instead of helping others. People that live selfishly will therefore live a life of misery and pain. So the first thing to have understanding is to give yourself love, give others kindness, patience, and joy. All these things are there's really no value, the value of material. There's a value of yourself to practice inside yourself each and every day from having correct, right understanding. And if you keep thinking those things, then in turn you have right thought. That thought which is wholesome, which is good, that thought which is to give others kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The thoughts which align us to remove greed, anger, ignorance, which I will constantly remind not only for you, but for myself as well, because of the way when we teach the Buddha through right speech, from thoughts comes speech, we change our mind, we change our thoughts into being a more positive or peaceful person. Speaking in this way, where we give love, encouragement, and joy in others, naturally, from my own personal experience, we see from instead of saying negative things, harsh things, hurtful things, the words will change.
Yeah. Thank you. But would you please explain a little bit more about right view, right understanding? Do you think that the most important is that understand ourselves is truly important?
Yes. So if I focus on my talk today on having right understanding, right view, it's really a great gift more than ever in this world when we're so obsessed with doing work and other things that we tend to not have time to look into ourselves. The more time we look into and understanding ourselves is one of the methods that the Buddha taught us to see. We see ourselves first, we give ourselves forgiveness, kindness, and love. We see what makes us joyful, what makes us happy. What are the things that causes us to live in misery, pain, depression, suffering? What in a way causes us to live in happiness, joy, peace, and love? And if you investigate clearly enough into yourself and giving enough time, kindness, and compassion, you're able to see in your life, to diagnose what is it that causes you to harm yourself, others, think negative to yourself and others, think unwholesome to yourself and others, and reverse, remedy, or give supplement to kindness to yourself, understanding to yourself. Giving yourself these aspects is one form of correct understanding. You don't do it in a selfish way, but you also always do it in a compassionate way. You do this to help yourself in order to help others. And so with every single time you spend into self-reflection, you're able to then give that peace, that happiness, that kindness back out into the world. And so,
thank you very much. Thưa quý khán thính giả của đài truyền hình IBC, xin quý vị hoan hỷ tiếp tục theo dõi sau phần giới thiệu các cơ sở thương mại bảo trợ cho đài IBC. Chúng tôi sẽ trở lại ngay. Xin cảm ơn quý vị.